Are you a From Software fan? No, I said a From Software fan. Okay, we're getting there, but we have to go back even further. Back to their very first game, Kingsfield. Kingsfield is a first-person dark fantasy dungeon crawler RPG for the PlayStation 1. It looked like complete ass, and yet it had this weirdly compelling atmosphere and vibe to it, something I've only really felt from that game. It was also quite tough and had a major focus on exploration, something the Souls series would also continue. Fast forward to 2023 and we have the full release of a spiritual successor of sorts called Lunacid, coming from developer Kira, who also made the terrifying Lost in Vivo. Lunacid is very clearly directly inspired by Kingsfield, and that would be obvious to anyone who has played both. I'm not going to spend all my time talking about the comparisons between them, because we'd be here forever. Instead, I'll talk about the game as it is, and my experience with it. Lunacid begins with a cutscene of what looks like a modern-day small town. Suddenly a giant monster rises out of the sea and covers the world in a poison mist, as a narrator tells us the events after that.
Corrupting everything it reached, the poison fog slowly transformed the world and brought about a new age. Now grounded by the poison sky and outnumbered by creatures, humankind became desperate and formed feudal kingdoms. Closed off from each other, they became paranoid and are on the brink of extinction. Those deemed undesirable, such as criminals or the ill, are cast out, banished into the depths of the great well.
You play as somebody exiled for thievery, or at least that's what's implied from the old man who dumps you in the well. From here we get to create our character, including our name, class, portrait, which can be a custom image if you choose, and pronouns! I'm pretty sure pronouns were just added to annoy the kinds of people you would expect it to annoy, which is funny. You're never referred to by any pronouns though, only your name. The classes determine your starting stats, which you'll be leveling up by doing all sorts of killing. The most important stat is easily speed. Trust me, you don't want to be role-playing this game as a snail.
You know what they say about people who live life in the fast lane, don't you? They do not live in fucking England!
The game begins proper in Hollow Basin, basically just a big cave. Up ahead is the first save crystal, which you can use to level up, save, or warp to Wings Rest, the hub world of the game. At Wings Rest, you can talk to multiple different interesting and unique characters, including Best Girl Demi and Clive the Yapping Skeleton. There's a shop here ran by a crow for buying items, a barkeeper who specializes in alchemy, which I never used once, and finally a smith's grave at the back for upgrading your weapons. Weapons are interesting in Lunacid. Some of them cannot be modified in any way, but others have a weapon XP bar in the top right, which is slowly filled by killing enemies or destroying breakables in the world. Once it's filled, you can dump it in the smith's grave and get an upgraded version of that weapon. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about this system, as it incentivizes experimenting with new weapons, which is good, but there's also so many frequently new upgradable weapons that you can spend a lot of the game not getting to use the weapons you want if you just want to focus on upgrading others. It's a minor nitpick, and sometimes you can upgrade weapons into something far cooler than they were previously. You can equip 2 weapons at a time and 2 rings as well. Rings are where you get your magic spells from and can range from simple things like a lightning bolt to literally bringing life to inanimate objects. I didn't go for a full magic build, so I can't say how viable it is truly, but certain spells are useful regardless. Like in the early game, there's a spell for casting a ball of light that follows you around, or the blood drain spell, which you can do multiple different things with throughout the game relating to secrets or opening doors. You can have a set of quick items too, most of which I never used outside of health and mana potions, but they're good to have there. The inventory is a bit clunky, but also deliberate. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, since while it's intentional, it can also become a bit tedious throughout the game. Switching weapons combat isn't quick, as there's a big list of weapons by the end, and having to switch out your quick items just to use a single use item instead of being able to use it in the inventory does get old. I'd also constantly get a bug where when I went to switch weapons, it had scrolled a list and throw off where I wanted to select. Enemies in Lunacid range from your typical dark fantasy enemies like skeletons, slimes, slime skeletons. Speaking of slimes, there's a slime waifu too. There's also rat kings, floating horse heads, mythical elks, and floating nervous systems. That last one especially just kind of freaks me out, seeing a whole ass nervous system floating towards you. There's also a handful of bosses in the game, but since they're so rare, I'm not going to spoil their appearances. Some enemies are resistant to different types of damage, which means you might find yourself having to switch out weapons sometimes, so it's good to have weapons equipped with different damage dealing types for these situations. Some enemies also have critical weak points you can keep attacking to deal more damage and sever those body parts. The combat in Lunacid has a deliberateness to it. You can go in and swing at enemies wildly and hope it dies quickly, and while this is good for one weapon, you're really meant to charge all of your attacks for maximum damage, shown by the charge bar in the top right. This basically has you in a back and forth of attacking and strafing back or around the enemies in order to not get hit. Thing is, I never really found the combat that tough. I'm pretty sure I only died to 1 or 2 enemies in the whole game. See, in Kingsfield you are both incredibly slow and it's easy to take damage in that game, and healing was more involved than in Lunacid, where you can just go back to your nearest save crystal to get all of your health back, or just chug a health potion quickly if you really need to. Now, there is an option called Legacy Mode, which makes it play more like Kingsfield in that regard, with the speed stat changing how fast you turn, halving your overall speed, and making melee weapon hitboxes much larger. This means you also can't strafe, which is a big blow to your movement overall. I didn't play with this enabled, but I imagine it addresses pretty much all of the combat difficulty issues I described. That said, I don't think it should take an experimental mode to make your game more difficult. The combat isn't really the main draw anyway though, at least not for me. That comes in the form of the exploration and level design. There's many different areas in this game, all with their own unique look and feel. The game goes for a kind of late 90s to early 2000s look, with a bit of anime infusion in its character design. It's obviously meant to invoke that PS2 feel the most, and there's optional filters to change how the game looks, including a PS1 inspired filter. I wanted to use this filter, but it made the text pretty hard to read, which is a shame. The game even goes as far as to have its own in-game manual you can read, meant to resemble an actual video game manual from back in the day. It's really cool stuff. As for the locations themselves, you'll be going to places like this gorgeous underground forest, undead crypts, to a huge sprawling lake filled with blood. Every area feels unique and well thought out, with lots of different secret walls to discover with sometimes really interesting things behind them. Sometimes secret walls within secret walls, and sometimes you'll find something you wish you hadn't. There's only one save crystal per main location, but the game will oftentimes use shortcuts near the end to loop your way back to them, which is always a relieving feeling after going a while without saving. Some light non-story related spoilers here, so go to the timestamp on screen if you want to skip it. There's a 50-floor combat gauntlet hidden away in one of the areas that grants you the Moonlight Sword if you complete it. This thing is quite literally just the Holy Moonlight Sword from Software games, and it's as cool as you'd expect. My game actually bugged when I got it for the first time, and I had to redo the entire thing to get it, but it was worth it just to be able to swing this thing. There's also a particularly out of place and hard to reach weapon called the Blessed Wind in a small optional area, but it's also well worth it as this thing swings ridiculously fast and does some good damage too. The music in this game is also excellent. There's multiple tracks per area, ambient tracks reminiscent of Silent Hill. Some more intense tracks. and also the beautiful hub theme. The music adds a lot to the vibes of this game. I'd call Lunacid a vibes game above all else. It's just really rewarding to explore these big environments and figure out what happened in this world. Honestly, I didn't pay too much attention to the story, but it's pretty much only told through NPC dialogue or multiple books you can find, as well as weapon, spell, and item descriptions. The world building is definitely there if you're looking for it, but you can also just entirely ignore it if you'd like, which is great. My favourite location is probably the Sanguine Sea, just because as well as the aesthetic wonder that is this endless pool of blood everywhere, there's nothing going on here. It's just one big area that connects to 3 other areas, with a few enemies and a big giant walking around. I really like stuff like this. I'm going to talk about the endings of the game now, so spoiler warning obviously. Once again, I'll have a timestamp on the screen if you want to skip. There's 4 endings to Lunacid. The first is the most simple. Once you beat the final boss, you'll come across the Great One, the same beast from the intro of the game. Here you awaken it, and it flies out of the well and to the moon. After this, a voiceover plays over some real life footage of a forest in the background.
When a dreamer awakens, what happens to the inhabitants of the dream? Or the world that was traveled? Or the pain that was felt? The experience will linger sometimes, and the dreamer will remember. Some aspects of the dream will travel the veil and live with the dreamer in the waking world. There are no credits here, because this isn't the end. Newest of the fallen, take up your sword and fight.
I'm not really sure what any of this means, as like I said, I didn't really pay too much attention to the story, but it is cool and I like the use of the forest footage. The second ending is more involved, with you needing 30 strange coins to complete it. These are obtained by destroying a shell in the Temple of Silence using the Blood Magic spell, killing the Jurten with the Jurten Slayer weapon, and killing Death using the Limbo weapon. The Limbo weapon itself requires a few steps to get, having to find 3 different items in a late game area, one of which can only be obtained on a full moon night, which from what I can tell is influenced by your system clock, so messing with that can help you get it faster. Once all of that is done, you can enter a specific door after which a cutscene triggers. Congrats, you're an awful person and you killed everyone. The third ending is significantly easier to get. All that is required is going left down a hallway just before the trigger for the first ending and staring into a pool of water for a few seconds. Some text appears on screen, talking to you from the perspective of your own computer. It's a really weird ending, and I'm not even sure how anybody would find this without looking it up. The final ending is the most bizarre and most involved. You need to find all the spells in the game, a secret VHS tape hidden behind a wall, play it using a TV hidden behind a wall, which is hidden behind another wall, repeat what happens in the video, use the key obtained from it on a wall well out of the way in a different location, pick up another VHS tape, and then finally use it on a big TV hidden behind a wall in a castle. After all of this, just do the main ending again, and eventually you will wake up on the moon itself. At this point, a long and arduous rhythm game boss battle plays. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty much certain this is a reference to one of Drakengard's endings. Both involve you fighting giant monsters in different realms, both are rhythm game boss battles, and both endings are called E. You might be wondering how this is E if there's only 4 endings, but the third ending is referred to as both C and D. After defeating the boss, you'll be transported to a new dimension named after your character, where you can wander endlessly to your heart's content. So that's Lunacid, a really cool Kingsfield inspired indie game. Whatever Kira puts out next, I'm having my eyes on. I would have played Lost in Vivo, but truly I am far too afraid of that game, so that's out of the question. Turbo Overkill video is still in the works. I just think I made a mistake making such a long video, because the motivation to work on it is a lot harder, but it is coming. I'll see you all then.